Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Nkosana Moyo. Enjoy this conversation. Let's move on to you've worked on the continent.
Yeah.
You as in finance, non-executive director of Nisela Capital, Old Mutual PLC, Rwanda, the Commercial Bank of Rwanda, Uganda, Nigeria, patron of NEPAD. I've already said Old Mutual PLC. When you look at the continent, what's your view of entrepreneurship and the role of business? Are we at a place where we can move the needle using entrepreneurs, financing of businesses? Where are we? What's your assessment in that space?
You know, Trevor, I think, can I suggest we start in a different place?
Sure, absolutely.
There is, I think, a nestedness between the role of the public sector and the role of the private sector. The environment in which the private sector operates will either be facilitative or quite poisonous or toxic, depending on what the public sector does in any environment. The public sector is responsible for creating what in economics is called public goods, an enabling environment, infrastructure, which society as a whole can tap into, or different entrepreneurs can tap into. Entrepreneurs, they've got a much narrower responsibility. They will tend either to be managers, general private sector, either managers or entrepreneurs managing their own entity or managing public listed companies or companies that are owned by a subset of the society, not all of it. And their objectives reflect that narrowness. Either entrepreneur, me and my family, or a group of us as friends come together and do something. We expect our CEO to perform according to what our interests are. Yeah? The public goods are the responsibility of the public sector. So in my opinion, is the achievements of the private sector on its own are limited by that very architecture. That architecture.
I hear you.
Yeah. And also remember that the private sector, the role of competition in the private sector can actually be quite damaging if there is no referee. It's almost like, borrow from teams. When teams are left to fight it out, they need a referee virtually all the time. Private and public sector roles are similar. The public sector is responsible for public goods as well as being a referee for these other competitors to do what they have to do. But they need somebody to make sure that they are playing within the rules. They are not going beyond that. The evidence is there everywhere. Even at the level of the Olympics, where contestation is concerned, where competition is concerned, the human being defaults to the typical English expression, all is fair in war and love. Yeah? You need a regulator, you need a referee. Yeah? So private sector, huge contribution acknowledged. But can they do it on their own without the enabling role, regulation, facilitation of the public sector? My answer is no.
Interesting. Moving on to one of your big projects right now, you, the founder of MINDS, the Mandela Institute of Development Studies.
Yeah.
You are now on the advisory board, member of the advisory board. I suspect MINDS share with us rather your thinking behind MINDS, what the vision is, and what will do you, I mean, you're 70 now, let's say 80, what will success look like for you as far as MINDS is concerned?
Again, it's a journey. It's a journey like the politics. I'm not a short-termist person.
Right.
But where does the MINDS journey start from? I've been associated with the World Economic Forum for decades, literally. And my observation was that we, as Africans, are always being invited onto platforms which are having conversations about things which are very peripheral to our situation.
Not our agenda.
Not our agenda. We as a people appear to have failed to create a platform where we can have what I call internal conversations. You know, as a family man, there are certain conversations you have in your family, which as soon as I walk through the door,
We keep quiet.
you're going to keep quiet about. But it doesn't mean that those conversations have got no element that can be taken to the outside. All it means is the foundation, however, is an internal conversation. An internal conversation. It's necessary before you then position yourself how to engage with the broader society. A very similar analogy applies, in my opinion, to nations and to regions. If Africa does not quickly come to a place where we can almost like confront our own devils, if you like, demons, as a family. When we walk out onto a public platform, i.e. more global, we become naturally, actually, we become defensive about certain things, and we never gave ourselves an opportunity
to deal with them.
To deal with these things internally. Yeah? As every family will do, there are certain conversations which you just will not have out there. We'll get defensive. But the way we've positioned ourselves is to always have the external conversation minus the internal conversation. So how we are now programming ourselves is literally defensive mode, because that's the mode we are now operating in. But that defensive mode totally disempowers you in terms of finding solutions for your real challenges. If you don't have the internal conversation where you can lay bare what the challenges are, you cannot expect to formulate solutions for them. Where are we doing that? Where are our conversations to confront our own reality so that we can formulate the solutions to these problems? And the defensive nature is normal, natural, and it will always be there. Everybody does it. It's just, yeah? But we've deprived ourselves of the possibility of a clarity of strategic thinking internally and finding the right solutions for ourselves. So we're always operating in that space.
So Minds is creating...
Minds is an attempt to form exactly this issue. There are certain strategic conversations that don't belong there, can never happen there. They can't. They belong here. Let's get on with it. Make sure that this happens. Yeah.
And how are you doing this?
Trying to engage the stakeholders.
Right.
Yeah. Trying to engage. As a result, what we've done, Minds to some extent, in fact, the name is a bit of a misnomer. The Mandela Institute for Development Studies, the S, I think actually, and I had this debate with the board, and we will continue to have it.
Yeah.
I think the S should be strategies, not studies.
Not studies.
It's formulation of strategies on how to deal with certain challenges that the African continent has. As a result, how we've structured Minds activities is a continuous engagement with certain stakeholders we've identified. The largest of who are the young people on the continent. As you know, the demographic tells you.
Yeah.
If you're going to come up with proposals of solutions to current challenges without engaging the youth, then you're not being serious. Yeah? So we're engaging with the youth for the youth to hopefully be persuaded, again, to take ownership as opposed to almost like refusing to understand that the solutions will come out of their own aspirations. The architecture of what needs to be done ought to be a result of their ability to conceptualize what future they want. Yeah? If I say to young people, if you take your mind 20 years from now and say to yourself, I've got two levels at which I operate, my country and my continent. And hopefully you understand the importance of that relationship, and say to yourself, 20 years from now, what would I like these two things to look like? What would I like my country to look like? And what would I like my continent to look like? That in many once that is not an easy exercise.
No.
If you force yourself to conceptualize, crystallize that, then what you do is say, okay, let me compare this 20-year vision to where I am today. What does today look like compared to that?
And what's my role?
Yeah, exactly. It's part of the component.
Yeah.
How do I go from here to there? What kind of partnerships do I need? What kind of leadership do I need? You realize that these questions help you now to configure today in preparation for starting the journey that takes you there. Unless you do both these things, it's going to be very difficult to do anything, because you'll just be wallowing around, wandering around. If you don't know where you want to go, any road will lead you there. That's really it.
Are you making traction? Are you positive in terms of what minds?
We are making traction. There are some challenges.
Yeah.
Challenges, as usual, resources.
Yeah.
What's fascinating about this is that our continent is still on a very difficult wicket in terms of our journey. Our people, successful people, people with resources, seem not to be very inclined to put resources into building institutions which deliver on this external, internal agenda. They are still wanting to buy membership to an external club. Okay? It's funny, because I think when you are analytical, it's rational, understandable, and there is nothing wrong with it. But until we get people who are analytical enough to understand without a negative attribution, we won't even get started on the journey. We are where we are because we are products of a process. That's fine. We can't change that. We can't deny it. But an awareness of who I am and why I am who I am is the beginning of understanding what I may need to do in order to change where I go.
So interesting. I mean, and we move on. We rather pay subscriptions to a foreign club.
Yeah.
We rather our agendas be set by other people and not our own solutions.
Yeah.
Which brings me to your views on how Africa has responded to the pandemic.
No, before I get there, Trevor, allow me. So let me give you another illustration of how problematic this issue of not understanding our journey is. I've often said to friends, I might even have said to you at some point, we as black people, black older people, in other words, taking generational responsibility, are colonizing the young African mind more than any white person ever did. Yeah? I don't know whether I've ever told you this.
No.
Yeah, so let me explain it. The lived reality of young Africans today is that when they want to be part of something that works, that delivers self-respect to them, whether it's a school or a hospital or an economy, it's not black run. So we are indoctrinating our young people to associate bad performance and failure with being black. And excellence and what is acceptable in terms of performance, whether it's sport, organizational, whatever, with not being black. So I have yet to come across a human being who does not like to associate with success. That's why when a national team does well, everybody in the team claims ownership. Because we associate with success. If we understood this, if we understood how important this is, we would make sure that everything we do is done through the lens of merit and excellence. Because it would turn around the association. Yeah? Young people would begin to be proud because they associate with a strive, with a Shingai Mutasa or whatever. They would begin to identify people who represent success, and they begin to accept themselves as being okay because of this identity and give themselves credibility. What we've constructed is that the people we put in charge of our institutions, of our countries, of our so-called state-owned enterprises or parastatals, have only demonstrated that what we touch, we destroy. Our roads, look at them. Young people now don't know another reality. They think this is normal. Who is damaging the brain? The ex-colonizer or us?
No, it's us.
Why are we not aware of this? And why are we not doing something about it?
Is it not because I think it's really at the center of the conversation that you and I have had, which is that, I think we haven't actually surfaced this. It's all about me. And if it's all about me running the government and running parastatals, I'm going to put people who are going to serve my interests.
But
So it's not
what
about
are your
merit.
interests, though?
Well,
why is national pride and national success not an interest? Why is a Singapore and a Lee Kuan Yew and a Mahathir and Malaysia and what Kagame is doing in spite of all the criticisms about human rights as a manager? Why is that not in your national interest? Why is what Botswana has done since Seretse Khama, why is that not in our national interest?
It should be a national interest, but there's not been a role model that models that. Which brings me to the question related to that, Nkosana, is, so we are where we are right now. Is it because of the way we are led, or is it because of us as a people, as a collection, or it's a combination?
It's a combination. But I think society is organized in a very hierarchical way. So the leverage that the ordinary citizen has is not the same as the leverage that the so-called, whoever we call a leader has. So the responsibility, I don't think, is proportionate. The responsibility has to be placed disproportionately on the leadership store. If you get a good leader, Africa will change just like that. It's easy precisely because we are very hierarchical in our mentality. We look up to seniority, up to a hierarchy. We are hierarchical. So if we get good leaders, actually the silver lining again is that if we get a good leader, and let me give an example to illustrate this. So when we ran the elections of 2018, President Mnangagwa, candidate Mnangagwa then, when he was president because of the events of he said, whether he meant it or not, but he said it. He said, we don't want violence during these elections. And I have to say with all honesty, I traveled up and down this country. I did not experience violence. I did not. And why did that happen? Because Mnangagwa, as head of the country, said so.
It can be done.
It can be done.
Yeah.
What is happening in this country is happening because Mnangagwa, as head of country, is not saying so. All the nonsense that's going on, if he, as head of country, said this will stop with the interest of society at heart, it would stop.
Are you surprised he's not doing that?
I think to the extent that is happening, yes, I'm blown away.
You're blown away.
I'm totally blown away. I just did not expect it to be this bad. No.
Why do you think it's that?
I can't fathom it, to be honest with you. Because you would have thought that, and I like to use, history again. I look at history in a way where history should inform us. It should be a source of knowledge and guidance in terms of we learn from history, we know what to avoid and where we were. We must have learned from what we did between 1980 and now, which we need to change. There is no evidence of it. We seem to continue and make even worse the things that we know caused us a problem. This is not normal. And let me give you another provocative view about Zimbabwe. In the animal kingdom, every species understands that its long-term survival depends on the young. That's why adults will lay down their lives to protect the young, because from a species point of view, your days are numbered already as an adult. So when you protect the young, you assure a longer longevity of the species. I always say, except in Zimbabwe. The exception is Zimbabwe. We have destroyed our future because we've failed to conform to this very basic rule. You pay attention to the young in order to assure the future. Because that's who is going to survive and take you as a species into that future. How come here we don't see it that way?
Yeah, I think the problem, it's not a problem. You are naturally like you said, not a politician. And you tend to be very logical and you tend to rationalize these things. Because I think I've come to the conclusion that in as much as you say, why is the national interest not important? Sadly, I'm going to say this, sadly, there isn't a single person in ZANU-PF who is interested in the national interest.
But my question is why though? Why can't they see personal glory in a successful country? When Zimbabwe got independence, our passport was like a wonder document. And we were proud to carry a Zimbabwean passport. Yeah? Now, a lot of people wish they could hide it when they travel. You wish you could say, oh no, I am from some other country. That's a national pride.
Nkosana, I think there's a selfishness, there's greed, there's lack of vision, there's lack of passion. So unless something is going to benefit me and my family and those that are close to me, it's not important. I would actually go back to your paper that you presented that was embraced. It wasn't going to benefit a lot of people around that room. And
but
maybe but for you, because you're looking at it that way, but to some,
it's immediate, like tomorrow.
Them. It also threatened them, but there wasn't no immediate benefit there. Why would you not embrace a document that's going to be impactful for the generality? It's about where did it come from? Who is it going to embrace and so forth? That, sadly, is, for me, what characterizes our politics. It's not just ZANU-PF, it's also in MDC, which, in as much as you and I are so hopeful, sometimes you get up in the morning and this is so frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of these days we'll have to have a conversation with young people.
Yeah.
Because unless we can change the minds of young people, for them to begin to think more long term, not like I want to, yes, you have to feed your family tomorrow, but where do you want your children to be? Do you want your children to be subjected to xenophobia and not be able to say, I can up my bags and go home,
I think
and be proud of a home?
This is where I love the fact that we're having this conversation. For me, this is where the dialogue, the way I understand it, is a question of having a conversation about who are we? What things do we value?
So name me one person across the political divide. Name me one person who you think would go into that dialogue with that mindset.
Well, the conversation we've had right now, you and I, says it's not just about the political players who will benefit. It's expanding who attends, who participates in that. Because you're trying to avoid your reading of the situation in terms of how it's going to end. It ought to end, it ought not to end in chaos and destruction. Can we not avoid that by realizing that we are all stakeholders, you, me, and everybody else, and find a way of ensuring the national interest by making sure that there's more people involved in this conversation as stakeholders. Why it's not important is because bringing other people means that my interest gets strengthened. For me, that's what do you think?
No, I hear what you're saying, but for me, it's again saying we've got a government which is presiding over a country that is dysfunctional. If that government really cares about Zimbabweans, even before any conversation, I want to see the indications in its behavior.
Sure.
That it is seized with activities that would benefit this bigger. So that when they say, guys, we need to sit down and talk, I've got a reference point which tells me these guys are serious. I don't see that.
No, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
And this is where perhaps we are, let me put it this way, the conversation that ought to resolve the nation's problems is not primarily the conversation that ought to take place between the political parties. It's about all stakeholders, which therefore makes this difficult. But what I share with you is the long-term vision that at some point, people realize that not talking to each other is not in the national interest in terms
So
of.
let me use Trevor. You know that, I mean, I say this partly because I've tried. So I went to Poland. I attended 2 meetings of Poland when I and the team. Not only that, the
ZCC, Zimbabwe Council of Churches,
called a meeting again to attempt to initiate some kind of dialogue. I went there. And what is fascinating about these events, there was also before the election, there was a move to commit almost like to a code of how the elections were going to be conducted. What is fascinating about when these attempts are made, you begin to see our concept of what it is to be important. And you see this through who doesn't turn up. They are making a statement by saying, I'm about this. We are not even close to having a group of people at the top who are concerned about Zimbabwe, who would understand that actually, I'm important as a human being, but in terms of what I want to achieve for my country, I'm only a part of.
A small part
of, as you say, people who should be mobilized to contribute to shaping the process of how we get about doing this. When somebody doesn't turn up because they are making a statement, I'm too big for this, you fail before you even start.
Absolutely. I think that is our problem. I would still want you to answer my question about Africa's response to COVID. In the first instance, and also you are a scientist, the vaccines and the unfairness, for lack of a better word, in terms of the access to vaccines, and your view. Have you gotten your jab? Should we have a jab?
Well, that's a tough one. Let me start with that one because it's the simpler. I'm turning 70 this year, so in many ways, for me, it's neither here nor there. So I've had the jab, but I'm having a much more serious conversation with my kids. In other words, should they have the jab or not? I think the jury is out. Ultimately, they'll decide. My inclination is to say no. But there are a number of elements to the science, and some of it you could almost like say it's pseudoscience, and therefore I'm going to put it out, but I'm aware that it's got lots of challenges. Every time you use external facilitation to help your body do certain things, you blunt your body's own natural mechanisms to do the same for itself. This is fundamental, basic, okay? So whilst I understand the importance of scientific interventions, we need to really be conscious of the fact it's like a ventilator. Every time you put somebody on a ventilator, you actually lower their own capacity to breathe for themselves. It's like a contradiction, which we need to understand, okay? So my opinion is that we need to be, the science that was used, the new technology and so on, huge challenge in its own right. The medical profession, I'm not a medical doctor. I've got a PhD, but not a medical, I'm not a medical doctor. The medical profession itself cannot agree what is going on. What happened? Should it have happened? These clothes that they're talking about, you know what I mean? So I think there is a huge debate, and I think in many ways we've been too rash. But the numbers, we've been playing roughshod over the statistics as well. When you stack up the number of people who've died through COVID and the people who normally just die through all the other things we've learned to accept, including the common cold, is a lesson to see how emotions can be hyped way beyond what is rational. And I think the jury is out. There is nothing I can say today which is going to give you the answers. Only time will begin to clarify what happened, whether it should have happened or not, our actions as a community of nations, what we did, what we didn't do, whether we should have done it or not. Only history will tell. Okay? But my attitude as an individual is that I've taken the job. Whether I die or not, to some extent now, is a moot point. Okay? Yeah? So that's there we are. But Africa. So I think the first thing is that we got away very lightly.
Yes.
And my opinion is that we are not doing enough to try and get to the bottom of what exactly explains how come we got away. I've got my own views, but they are not grounded in a properly structured study and analysis. My opinion is that if you look at infant mortality, intuitively I suspect that if you did a serious study of infant mortality and compared it to societies that then suffer huge casualties in the later ages, age groups, you'll find, I think, a roughly inverse relationship. And what that talks to, if that were to be the case, is typical Darwinian. When people grow up in Mbare playing kids, playing outside sewage and so on, a lot of them will die. But those who survive are ready to face anything in terms of survival. That's my intuitive feel. That the explanation actually will find that what we call primitive societies and people living in very difficult conditions where we thought intuitively people will die like flies, that did not happen. Because I think their immune system is so strong that,
That's interesting.
And I think there is something here to be mined. But remember, it relates back to what I said earlier. The more medical intervention you rely on, the more you weaken your system generally to withstand
its own defense.
Its own defense mechanism.
And the vaccine nationalism and the lessons for Africa there?
I am going to be very provocative. My attitude is that my understanding of the human animal, is that part of what we need to understand as Africans is that we've abused religion to our detriment. The world of animals is largely through the lens of contestation. Every element of animal behavior, amongst which we feature in my world, okay? Contestation means we're always trading a very delicate balance between compete and cooperate. Depending, it's like an intuitive process of assessing. Is this a situation where I should cooperate? What is in it for me? And it goes from the individual to my family, to my community, to my country, to my continent, and so on, yeah? So, vaccine nationalism, I don't think there is anything irrational about it. For as long as the concept of a nation state exists, if I'm elected as a president of Zimbabwe, do you really expect me to give a vaccine to Zambia when my people are still not vaccinated? Does that make sense? No, tell me. Does it?
No, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So why do we expect it? Why
the assumption is we are connected. None of us is safe unless all of us are safe.
Trevor, you are right. You're absolutely right. But the challenge of global governance of health, which is now where you're going, is something that we've not yet resolved. With or without a pandemic. We've just not resolved it. Yeah? How do you put global governance of anything side by side with sovereignty and come up with an answer which is sensible? So, again, I want to be very graphic about this. So, Trevor is running country X. I'm running country Y. Trevor is being irresponsible in this country, which borders my country. Sovereignty says, I let him do what he wants, largely. Okay? That's the world we've created. So, solve it for me. Maybe I'm too stupid to understand.
No. There's a selfishness which drives a lot of things that humans do. But you would hope that civilization or self-interest tempers that a little bit?
You know, in private equity, there is a concept called alignment. When you design things, and they've got different components, and you've got inbuilt contradictions which you don't deal with, then the chances of you having things work in a manner like a machine, yeah, where the gears are not synchronized and so on and so on, is virtually zero. You, in engineering terms, we understand it, it's straightforward. Unless the gears are synchronized, they're going to grind and smash each other, right? In human behavior and in human society, we don't pay attention to what I call alignment. In other words, the personal interests, the national interests, the global interests are such that we're going to act in concert to deliver a solution which works at all three levels. We've not done that.
No.
We've rushed ahead and created globalization. We've stayed with the architecture of the nation state, where I, as a voter, I'm not interested in what president of Zambia does. I'm interested in Trevor, who I elected, being accountable and putting my interests above all else. Further, we then created this misalignment. We're saying, oh, you can travel anywhere, you can jump on a plane and go wherever. But actually, your government can continue to be stupid in terms of dealing with health issues. And it's okay. They've got sovereignty. Really?
Nkosana, you and I could go on and on. The people that follow this show love books, Nkosana, and you've brought a couple of books there. Please talk us through the books that you want to recommend and why you want to recommend those books.
So the first one is negotiations. Everything we do as human beings, everything, whether it's within the family, in our small communities, with friends or whatever, sort of without being aware of it, we always kind of negotiating. What are we going to do? When we do things together, we are trying to create a space where there is acceptability and benefits to all the members of that community. This is what negotiation is about.
Wow.
Yeah? And I would urge, especially young people, to really, really understand what is in here if they can lay their hands on this.
And it's a book by...
It's a business. It's
one of Harvard
Business Essentials.
Right.
It's a very easy read. You can see it's a very small book. The essential, though, touch back on some of your questions to me. Why not have a dialogue? A dialogue has got preconditions of all of the parties when you go into a negotiation, having clarity. What I want, why I want to negotiate, why I want to go into a dialogue, what I want out of it, what are my walk away points. In other words, what is my reserve price beyond which I'll say, you know what, it's not worth it, I'm walking away. But critically, it requires that I accord all the other parties exactly the same. In my mind, before I come to negotiate with you, I must give legitimacy to Trevor's own interests.
Yeah. Fully.
If I don't do that, I won't achieve anything. Even if I would wink you into something like that because I think I'm smart, it will unwind down the line. Yeah? These are the essentials of negotiations, of dialogue.
So that's the first
That's the first book. This one, obliquity. Again, very simple thing is that when, again, we look at life and our lives, it's fascinating that most things that we achieve are achieved through a path which is indirect.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Indirect.
Yeah.
But I think the speed with which modern life is
So
happening,
this is Obliquity by John Kay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The speed with which things are happening around us these days tends to force us inadvertently into a very direct mechanism. So I walk into this room, I've got a meeting with Trevor. I don't spend time asking Trevor about his health, about his family, and all of these so-called time-wasting things which used to happen. Actually, they ease the ground. When we get to the substance, a lot will have happened already in terms of establishing a rapport. It appears to be long-winded, indirect, but actually it shortens the journey further down the line. But in the modern day, I walk in, shake hands, Trevor, oh, did you read the papers?
Let's do the deal. Let's
do the deal. But actually, when we look at real life, it's like that, obliquity.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Yeah.
Then the next one?
Then this book, I've picked up 3, but I want to leave you with another 2, which I didn't bring. Colin Powell wrote this book. It worked for me. And my biggest takeaway from this book was his relationship with what we would call subordinates, colleagues, but where there is a rank, i.e. there is somebody senior and so on. I was fascinated by the element in this book about his capacity to have incredible clarity about creating an environment where his subordinates understood they could challenge him as if he was just a counterpart. In the process of arriving at a decision, he gave them license, permission to be very challenging. Challenge does not mean you are disrespectful. But he then said, once we have decided, then I want even those who were against that decision
to line up.
No, they're not just line up.
No.
To own it and act as if it was their decision.
Powerful.
Yeah? It's but it's such a powerful thing if you're going to create ownership of whatever, because the implementation of anything is not a hierarchical issue. Implementation is by the troops. And if they've been involved with that license of, I'll robustly say no and tell you why I say no, argue with you and feel I've got permission to do so, it's easier for me to then come into line and execute.
Interesting. Why I'm responding is because he's a military man, and you did talk earlier about the military.
Yeah.
But an Oxford professor of mine said something which has stayed with me for a while. He said, the difference between politics and business is that in politics, you get into a meeting, you agree on something to go and implement. When you walk out of the room, you all behave in a manner that makes it impossible to implement what you agreed on. In business, you get into a boardroom, you have a conversation, a discussion, you all go out to implement on what you discussed. And it says to me that politics is...
Okay, Trevor, yes and no. Yes and no, because you're right if you define politics as all of these different parties put together. When I look at a ruling party as politics, as a political party, there is nothing about the architecture of a ruling party that is different from a company. Why don't they all own the agenda all at the same time? There is absolutely no excuse, none. I think it's the clarity, especially of the person running the show. Go to Kagame and try and do that. Just you try it.
You have 2 other books? You have 2 other books?
One of the books which I read a long time ago, I've lost it, and I think it's actually out of print, was by Mahathir, the Prime Minister of Singapore, of Malaysia at the time. And it was called The Malay Dilemma.
I think I've got that book actually.
You have?
Yeah,
I've lost
your
mine.
book. I think
it's my book.
I suspect I've got it, but
I want that book. But that is an amazing book because it also speaks to some of our challenges. How do you take over a society that has got these historical divides? Like, very quickly, Malaysia had, the people who had assets in Malaysia were of Chinese origin. The majority, the Bumiputra, had very little at stake. And what the leadership of Malaysia had to grapple with was, how do you make a minority which has got everything understand that it is in their interests to bring up this majority who've got nothing to lose, create more people with something to lose as a protection mechanism.
Powerful. Yes,
Zimbabwe failed to manage that. Zimbabwe totally failed to manage. How do you create clarity about the past is the past? I'm clear about the future I want to create, and how do I mobilize my community, all the aspects of my community, to start to begin to see common good in the construct of creating that future. Yeah?
Yeah. And the last one?
The last one is pick up a book about Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore.
Right.
So it's Malaysia and Singapore,
Yeah.
okay? And for me, Singapore talks to something I go on and on about, which people don't seem to pay too much attention, meritocracy. Lee Kuan Yew's approach to building Singapore was based, amongst other things, on a clarity about meritocracy. Merit and competence develops very quickly a self-belief by the people. Self-belief is a necessary ingredient for people to feel they can do anything. They have to believe in themselves. How do they get to believe in themselves? Through observing the people they identify with doing things competently. Then if you can do it, so can I. That's how children behave. If they see another child swimming, their attitude immediately,
I can do it.
I can do this.
Yeah.
And
Wow, Nkosana,
Yeah.
you and I, like I said, could go on and on. Thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
finding
My
the time to have this conversation. I know you are a busy man, so thank you so much for the time. Allow me, Nkosana, to tend to our viewers who are in Zimbabwe, who are on the continent, and all across the diaspora for watching this conversation every week, watching this show every week. And I invite you to ensure that you don't miss out on any of these quality conversations, to click on this red button and subscribe. And when you do that, you'll get a notification every Monday at 7 a.m. when we have these quality conversations, and you'll be able to enjoy the quality conversations. But until next time, cheers to you all.